We have a special guest today. Levi-Samson, Beardy, pastor and military veteran, is here to share his experience with us.
Well, welcome to the show, Pastor Levi. Thank you for joining us today.
Just a tremendous honor. Thank you.
Yeah, it's such a great honor to be able to have you share your experience with us today. So, why don't you share that? How did growing up in an Indigenous community inspire you to join and serve in the armed forces?
Well, it's a complicated issue about the living up, growing up and being inspired to join the military because it was for ulterior motives. What happened was we sensed a strong element of discrimination and racism in the 60s, in the early 60s, in the southern community that we moved to. We'd come from the far north. We couldn't speak English, and my parents never did learn English, but we experienced something. And during the 60s, there were the race riots in the United States, and the issues with the indigenous communities down there, fighting for their rights. And as a young teenager, I thought we might have to stand up for our rights. And if we do, there may be some militant action required. So my thought was at that time, if I could find out how to be military active and professional, I should join the military. Didn't even cross my mind to join the cadets or any other paramilitary unit. I went directly into the regular force, and so that's really what spurred me on, was a desire to protect my people, to find out how to make life better for them for the future. So it wasn't about Canada, but that changed once I started seeing what was going on in the world and where the Canadian Forces was having a positive impact in peacekeeping around the world. Plus, what I ended up in was the Cold War and the battle against the Soviet Union at that time. And so I ended up really getting into the battle, if you want to call it that, not just for my people, but for the free world. So in a way, that was my driving force. So I ended up being in the military 21 years.
Wow, that's incredible. Well, thank you for your service. And so, how did your identity as an Indigenous person shape your experience in the military?
Well, I had gone in having experienced a lot of racism in the civilian world. And when I went to the military, especially at basic training and so on, we all had our hair cut off. I had long hair before that. So did so many others. This was the 60s. But we all looked like hairless young men. And as we were struggling to make it through the basic training and then going on to our trades training afterwards, there needed to be a common working together. So there were amazing people my age that worked with me and accepted me as a fellow soldier instead of looking at me as being an Indigenous person. So that's one of the things that myself, I felt accepted. And I knew that there was racism there too. So the English were sort of nitpicking at the French and then back and forth. And I was in the middle. And there's also a little bickering between other ethnic groups when they showed up. And one time I was teaching the Russian language and the course list came in. And one of the higher ups looked at the course list and said, "Wow, look at all those names. There's not one single good English name in there." And I thought, well, that doesn't sound right. And sure enough, he says, "Oh, there's one," he said. And he looked at it. And so when the class showed up, we called out the names, the class roll and so on. And that the person with that English name popped his head out from behind the others. He was an Indigenous man from northern Minnesota, northern Manitoba. So even the one with the English name was not English. It was, in fact, his last name was the same as the current national chief, Woodhouse. So Woodhouse sounded very English, of course, but it was an Indigenous person that had Richard Woodhouse. Yes.
Yeah, it's the things that we often overlook, right? And so we get this opportunity today to really remember and honor Indigenous veterans. So, what do you think are the most important steps that we can take as a society to support Indigenous veterans and even current service members?
Yeah, I think it's it's very important to recognize all that they put into it. For the small numbers of Indigenous people that come from, compared to the rest of Canada, a high percentage have gone into the military, especially during times of crisis. During the First World War, I know that one reserve I was at, Curve Lake First Nations, just north of Peterborough, had every single male go into the military, sign up that were able to do so, and so that they sent all of their young men, and so one of the things I want to commend the Royal Canadian Legion for is this little pamphlet that they have, and along with this I don't know if we can see it here, but it's on my chest here. There's the medals I have. I have a couple more medals coming besides that, the Aboriginal Veterans Medal and Alert Medal. But this one here is a little medal with some feathers on the bottom, and over here it's one that's beaded, sent by one of my native friends, and so on. So I just wanted to say that the write-up that the Royal Canadian Legion has done up on this is saying that the Aboriginal veterans have served in both in Canada's military forces and as allies from the formative times of the War of 1812 to the present. Their military contributions were central to Canada's survival in earlier times, and the Royal Canadian Legion honors today's veterans, Aboriginal veterans, and their ancestors. So when things like that make me feel good, because I know so many people gave of their best to protect the country, and many times when they came back, especially in the 50s after the Second World War and so on, and the First World War, they didn't receive the respect that they should have had. They were thrown back into the treadmill of being the oppressed ones, whether residential schools or 60 school, their families were torn apart. So I would say to pray for as a pastor, I would say pray for the descendants of those Aboriginal veterans as much as you can, and to honor them and thank them for the service that their ancestors have done for the nation of Canada.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing your experience with us today and for being here. Well, for more information on Pastor Levi, you can visit 700club.ca.